Hello, I'm Dr. Patrice Little here at NP Student Mag, where we're keeping you updated with every aspect of your life in and out of school. Today, we are talking business, practice, and legal guide with attorney Carolyn Buppert of Portland, Oregon. Welcome, attorney Buppert. How are you today?
Very well. Thank you, Patrice.
So let's get started. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself as a nurse and an attorney?
Well, I started off in journalism. After my college, I got a degree in journalism. I had considered some of the healthcare professions, but I was not confident that I could do the science. So I like to write. So I got a degree in journalism and became a newspaper reporter at a small paper. And after that, I evolved to work for various institutions in their PR and media relations offices. So when I was doing that, at one point, I did some volunteer work in my spare time for Planned Parenthood. And there I was working, they put me in as a chaperone with a nurse practitioner. Her name was Nancy Gordon Zwirling. And I was so impressed with her and the work she was doing that I started thinking about becoming a nurse practitioner. So career change, right? But I still didn't think I could do the science. So I went to community college and started taking chemistry and organic chemistry and so on, and I could do it. So I went to nursing school. At that point, there weren't any of these programs where if you had a degree, you could bypass some of the college. I had to do 3 years of nursing, and then I went to grad school after a year out and got my master's. So it was 5 extra years after college. And then I was so used to going to school and working all the time because I always had to work full time, that I decided to go to law school while working as a nurse practitioner. So by that time I was back east at Johns Hopkins working as a nurse practitioner. So I did that between 8 and 5, and then 5:30 to 9:30, I go to law school. So when I got out of law school, I continued to work as a nurse practitioner part-time and did law work part-time. And then eventually it was full-time law, and I wasn't doing enough nurse practitioner work. So I whittled that down, because if you don't do it enough, you're not very good. So I whittled that down. And for the last, I don't know, 20 years or so, I've done law, but all my law has to do with nurse practitioners. So the fit didn't happen immediately, but once I wrote the book, The Nurse Practitioner's Business Practice and Legal Guide, I started doing more and more nurse practitioner law stuff, not and less, I mean, bankruptcies and going to court and all that. So that's where we've been. So there aren't that many lawyers who are nurse practitioners, and I am no longer officially a nurse practitioner because I gave up my certification about 5 years ago because at that time I wasn't doing clinical, so you have to keep that up. So it's time to give it up. But I was a nurse practitioner for 16 years and a nurse for 19 or something. So that's where we are.
And you have a lot of wisdom and was able to package it into, I've always called it my Bible.
That's sweet.
It's my go-to for just about everything. I've been referring to your book for quite some time, but even before I graduated from NP school. And one of the things that I noticed, and you already mentioned, is that there's not as much nurses who are also attorney. And I thank you for sharing with us how you got started, because it's inspirational for those who are considering that track, and to know that it's okay that, hey, you may have to pause in one area and move on to the next area. Now, can you walk us through a day in a life of what it's like being a nurse attorney, including the types of services you offer for the NP community as well as physicians?
Sure. It's changed a bit since COVID, because before COVID, I was doing a lot of traveling, both to talk at nurse practitioner conferences and to do consultations. So I would get a hospital who would say, we've hired 400 nurse practitioners and we're not sure how to bill for them. So I would go and do training, or usually I would start with going to the hospital and finding out what was going on by doing interviews. And sometimes it wasn't just we need to know how to bill for them. Sometimes it was we think we may have a Stark Law issue. And I won't get into the details of the Stark Law, but basically it's the law that says that a hospital can't give money or non-monetary compensation to a physician in return for referrals. Well, some hospitals have basically given out nurse practitioners as prizes to private physicians. And basically the nurse practitioners work for the physician, but they're paid by the hospital. So that's a legal problem. So a hospital would call and they say, we think we might have a problem there. What can we do about it? So I would go and I would interview people, and I would look at the charts and see who had written what, who documented what, who signed what, who billed what, and who was employed by whom. And then I would come up with a report and say, yeah, I think you have a Stark Law problem or not. And here's what you can do to get out of this. So there would be various questions that would come up from hospitals, and I would either do consultations from my office or sometimes go there. All that has changed. I don't travel anymore. Hopefully it'll start up again, but no. So now I'm doing Zooms from my kitchen. And I still do advice letters. People like physicians will have, if they've hired a nurse practitioner, they might have a question about what that person can do and what their oversight needs to be and so on, or how to bill. I do a lot of contract review. Nurse practitioners get hired by physicians, and there's a 25-page employment contract, and I will review it and say, this is what I think you need to ask for, or ask that be taken out or be put in. So I do a lot of that, and that has continued. Still nurse practitioners being hired, so that is continued. I did a series of YouTubes on negotiating contracts, which are free and up. And I thought, because I'm getting near retirement age, so I thought I'll put all this out there, and then it'll be out there and people will have it. And if I retire, it'll still be out there. But what happened, which I didn't think was going to happen, is I think I got more business because of those YouTubes out there. I'm not sure why. I basically said, here's how you can do what I do yourself. But maybe it's, a bit confusing or whatever. I've been doing a lot of contracts. So advice letters, contracts. I used to represent nurse practitioners before boards of nursing. I don't really like to do that. And there are attorneys who do that all the time. So I usually refer that out. There are nurse practitioners who want to start their own practices. I will advise them, although I really shouldn't do that except in Oregon or Maryland, where I am admitted. So that's the basic gist. A lot of writing, a lot of speaking, a lot of advising. I don't go to court. I almost had to go to court last fall as an expert witness in a case against a nurse practitioner, but that was settled and I didn't have to. So I don't go to court, although, some nurse attorneys might, as in terms of litigating malpractice, but I don't do that.
Okay, understood. So a part of your day in life as an attorney is serving more on the consultant side and not per se litigation.
Yes.
Because one of the questions that many of our students are concerned about is like the whole malpractice. Like, is it something they should still have a concern about with the evolution of like the EMR being able to have where your notes are kind of like guided, like where you have to fill this and complete that, and then you also are able to e-scribe. So can you tell us if you know anything about that as far as a malpractice? Is it a greater concern today, or was it okay?
Yeah, so I basically collected cases against nurse practitioners for the last 30 years or so. I mean, so I do I closely monitor as much as I can what is happening in the malpractice world, although I don't litigate it. So it is still a problem, but it's not, and I'll tell you about a case that sort of I was affected by, or I guess impressed me in the last couple of months. And it was the case of a nurse practitioner in Oklahoma who was a family nurse practitioner working in an emergency department. And she was by herself. It was a rural area, by herself, family nurse practitioner, not an ER nurse practitioner, not an acute care nurse practitioner, family nurse practitioner. And a young woman came in, and it turned out the woman had a PE, and the nurse practitioner did not pick up on that. And the young lady died. And it was something like, it was millions and millions of dollars in damages, not to mention the horrible damage to the family. But the court came down really hard on the nurse practitioner's qualifications. Like, why, here you are in ER, you're all alone. Why are you a family nurse practitioner who is someone who has been educated to provide primary care? Why are you here alone in an ER? So the hospital took a hit for that. The nurse practitioner took a hit for that. And obviously the patient didn't do, you know, it was unfortunate for the patient. So the most common reason nurse practitioners are sued for malpractice is a misdiagnosis. And that was one. But that one was complicated by the fact that the nurse practitioner, in my view, wasn't the best, didn't have the best qualifications for that job, especially since she was by herself. Mm-hmm. But I think the point I'd like to make is people are very worried about malpractice, as they should be. But there are more nurse practitioners getting into trouble for other things lately. There are many people looking over nurse practitioners' shoulders. For instance, if you prescribe opioids, whether it be acute pain or chronic pain, you need to follow guidelines for prescribing that come out from the CDC or from certain organizations like the Society of Neurologists has one. Many state health departments have a guideline. Some medical societies have a guideline. But there are nurse practitioners who are getting into trouble because they are prescribing opioids without following the guidelines. And usually the reason it comes to light is someone overdoses. And in the investigation, well, where did they get this? And it comes down to a nurse practitioner. So there's that. And then there are things called pill mills, which essentially are medical practices devoted to the clientele of those who want opioids. So it's basically prescriptions for cash without going through all the guidelines, the things the guidelines call for. So there are nurse practitioners going to jail for prescribing. And that's heartbreaking. And it's not, a lot of times what I'm hearing from the nurse practitioners is they kind of get sucked into a practice where they go and they think they're going to be doing primary care, but it turns out that the patients all want opioids. That's what they've been used to from the prior providers. And they put their name on things and they don't go through all these guidelines. So that's one thing. It's like, yes, be worried about malpractice, but there are other ways to get into trouble that you need to be aware of. And one is the prescribing of opioids. One is taking a kickback, anything someone gives you in value in return for a referral. Like if a lab were to pay a nurse practitioner for sending the labs to that lab, that would be a kickback. People are getting into trouble for that. For the scope of practice problems, taking a job where you're not qualified and then something goes wrong and you get reported to the Board of Nursing. So let's see, what are some of the other, let me think of some of the other ways. Prescribing, kickbacks. Yeah, oh, one more. People are getting into trouble for prescribing for friends, family, colleagues, or themselves without going through the normal evaluation process. And if that comes to the Board of Nursing, you will be disciplined for that. So again, I think people sometimes get sort of sucked into situations where, because I have been, someone calls you and they want a prescription for their son for an antibiotic.
Yes, it's always that antibiotic.
And I don't have time to go to the pediatrician. Well, I could get out of that one because I wasn't a pediatric nurse practitioner. I was an adult. So I say, I cannot do it, cannot do it. But there are other ways you can get sucked in, including nurse practitioners who've been sucked into writing for opioids for colleagues, friends, family. And that the boards of nursing do not do not give you slack on that. You have to, if you're going to prescribe or treat or evaluate and treat, you need to go through the process. You have a medical record, you document a history, an exam, medical decision-making, and you provide follow-up. And a lot of times when you're taking care of family and friends, you don't do the notes, you don't go through the normal process, and you don't do the follow-up necessarily. So those are my watchwords, I guess, pitfalls to avoid.
And we appreciate you sharing those pitfalls, because that's, quite frankly, is what every NP should know, not just in practice, but even as a student, to be mindful, because whatever you practice as a student in your training, that is what you'll be implementing when you're independent. So I thank you, Attorney Buppert, for sharing those tidbits with us. How can students get in touch with you if they have some additional questions besides getting this book? I have to, let me tell you, this book is, even though I've had mine for some time, and I'm going to cut myself short, I just want to know, what other resources do you have in addition to the YouTube, and how students can get in touch with you?
Well, you can go to my website. I have some articles on my website, and my email address is there. My phone number is there. I mean, I have to qualify in that I can't be representing everybody, because I'm only admitted to practice in Oregon and Maryland. So I do contracts for people. I review contracts for people in all states, because that contract law is contract is a contract, basically. So I stretch it a bit by reviewing contracts for people in all states, but I can't start a practice in another state unless it's Maryland or Oregon. So what I can do for students is limited by that.
One of the things, when you mentioned that, when I recently paid for renewed my liability insurance, and he highlighted the fact, he said, well, where are you practicing? And I said, in Georgia. And he said, will you ever be giving something, I believe he said some type of, not advice, but education is on your platform? And because he said, you have to have coverage. Yeah. He said you have to have coverage. So for those students who are viewing us, I say that just to reinforce that as a practitioner, as an attorney, as there's a lot of practices like there where you are confined to the state, not as in they're keeping you in jail, but it's for safety, and the laws are different from state to state. And it's so important that we be in compliant with that. So Attorney Buppert, again, we appreciate the wisdom that you had shared with us. What you have is invaluable. This is the thing, this is necessary before anyone moves forward with touching their first patient. They should be aware of the book and all that you have in there. In fact, your story about the PE, I think I read that in an article. I'm like, she published that one.
Might have, yeah.
Yep, I read that one. So
well, I appreciate what you're doing here too, Patrice. So
thank you.
Go for it.
Thank you. And again, students, viewers, thank you for taking the time to join us here at NP Student Mag, the definitive voice of nurse practitioner students. We will see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share.